Maxine Max Quill adjusted her oversized sunglasses, taking in the eclectic vibe of the coffee shop. The place was a dizzying mashup of futuristic technology and retro decor, complete with a neon sign that proclaimed, "Coffee, the time traveler's fuel." She leaned against the counter, trying to blend in with the hip crowd of baristas and customers, but her mismatched socks and quirky, handmade jewelry screamed, "I'm not from around here." "Order up," the barista shouted, tossing a latte towards a customer who caught it with an impressive flourish. Max couldn't help but admire the grace with which the barista, who was wearing a bow tie and a top hat, worked. He was from the 19th century, desperately trying to grasp the intricacies of modern coffee making while simultaneously avoiding a hyperactive espresso machine that appeared to be attempting to escape. As she waited for her own drink, a simple black coffee, Max's thoughts drifted to the chaos of her life as a time warrior. It wasn't glamorous. Sure, she'd fought through countless eras, but all she wanted was a moment of normalcy. Instead, she often found herself in slapstick situations involving historical figures, existential dilemmas, and, at times, bizarrely aggressive coffee machines. Just as she took a sip of her lukewarm brew, an unfamiliar face caught her eye. He was wearing a sharply tailored suit, with an air of authority that made him stand out even in a place filled with time travelers. A glint of something metallic caught her attention. His lapel pin bore the emblem of the Temporal Authority, the most powerful faction of time manipulators. "Oh no," Max muttered under her breath, her mind racing. What was he doing here? She didn't want any trouble, especially not today. But before she could concoct a plan to make herself inconspicuous, the barista, who had just gotten the hang of making a double-shot cappuccino, accidentally sprayed a frothy cloud of milk right at the Temporal Authority guy. He sputtered, wiping his face in disbelief, and Max couldn't help but stifle a laugh. In an instant, the tension in the shop shifted. The Temporal Authority guy stood up, dripping milk and rage, and before Max could react, he turned his glare towards her. "This is unacceptable," he bellowed, causing heads to turn and eyes to widen. Just then, a loud crash echoed from the entrance. The door flew open, and in stormed a group of anachronists dressed in brightly colored leg warmers and headbands, chanting slogans about the freedom of time. The barista, caught in the middle of his latte artistry, managed to trip and sent his coffee machine flying toward the anachronists. "Time should flow freely," they shouted, dodging the flying equipment with surprising agility. Max realized that her coffee shop break had devolved into a full-blown time war. "Well, this escalated quickly," she murmured, grasping her coffee cup like a makeshift shield. The situation felt like a surreal blend of action and absurdity, and she couldn't help but appreciate the humor of it. With a deep breath, she dove behind the counter as the anachronists and the Temporal Authority engaged in a chaotic battle, complete with insults and wayward coffee supplies. Max found herself torn between wanting to help and simply wanting to avoid a facial from a latte. "Get the artifacts," one anachronist yelled, and Max's heart raced. Artifacts were what kept the timelines intact. If they fell into the wrong hands? Her eyes darted around, spotting an old coffee pot that looked strangely out of place. That might just work, she thought. Grabbing it, she stood up, her voice rising above the chaos. "Hey! Everyone! How about a coffee break?" The sudden distraction momentarily halted the fighting. She hoisted the coffee pot over her head like a trophy, its shiny surface catching the light. "Who wants some?" she shouted. Freshly brewed chaos. In that instant, Max saw her opportunity. She swung the pot around like a weapon, catching the anachronists off guard. One of them stumbled back, tripping over a fallen coffee machine. Laughter erupted from the crowd, easing the tension. Max seized the moment, feeling a surge of confidence. "I don't know about you, but I'm not here for a historical lecture," she yelled, eyes sparkling with mischief. "I'm here for good coffee and great stories." Just then, a portal opened behind her, swirling with vibrant colors. Max's mentor, Elliot, appeared, looking exasperated. "Max, you're supposed to be helping us stabilize the timelines, not starting a coffee shop brawl." "Hey, I'm multi-talented," Max replied with a cheeky grin, ducking another flying coffee cup. "But first, I think we need to clean up this mess." With a flick of her wrist, she activated her time-warping ability, temporarily freezing everyone in place. The anachronists looked particularly bewildered, while the temporal authority members were frozen mid-sip of their lattes. Max took a moment to appreciate the absurdity of the scene, snapping a quick selfie with her frozen friends. Once satisfied, she unfroze them and dashed toward the exit. Time to get to work. Hashtag Part 2. Max leaped through the portal, her heart racing as she emerged in a neon-lit 1980s mall. The walls were plastered with posters of pop stars, and the air buzzed with synthesizer music. She couldn't help but grin. This was the best time period ever for sheer entertainment. Her mission was clear: find the lost sock that held a key artifact in the 80s. It was silly, but it was essential. Rumor had it that it could stabilize chaotic time fluctuations. Max maneuvered through the throngs of shoppers, dodging neon leg warmers and shoulder pads. She spotted a store named "Sock It To Me," with bright colors and a disco ball spinning overhead. Perfect, she thought, racing inside. As she rifled through piles of wild socks, a group of anachronists, now dressed like they had just walked out of a music video, burst in, intent on causing mayhem. "Stop her," one shouted, pointing dramatically. Oh," Max whispered, hastily tossing a pair of fuzzy socks behind her. "Time for some quick thinking." "Who said socks can't fly?" she shouted, grabbing a handful and tossing them like frisbees. The anachronists dodged and stumbled, their expressions a mix of confusion and fury. "Why are we being attacked by socks?" one yelled, looking as if he couldn't believe this was how his day was going. "Because you chose the wrong time to mess with the wrong time warrior," Max declared, her confidence swelling. She snagged a sparkly sock from the display, the legendary artifact glittering in the light. "Gotcha." With the sock in hand, she dashed back to the exit, but the anachronists weren't ready to let her go. They pursued her, creating a ridiculous scene reminiscent of a bad chase in a cheesy movie. Max bolted toward the food court, where a gaggle of patrons cheered her on as if they were watching a performance. "Go, Max, go," they shouted, and she couldn't help but feel like a celebrity. Finally, she spotted an exit and dove through, landing with a thud in the Renaissance, a place of art and intellectualism. The world was a swirl of color, with artists painting, thinkers discussing, and a few courtiers glancing her way with raised eyebrows. "Great," she muttered, brushing herself off. "Now to find that spatula." As she navigated through the crowded square, she spotted a stall overflowing with kitchen gadgets and cooking utensils. But just as she approached, a pompous painter bumped into her, splattering paint all over her shirt. "Watch where you're going, commoner," he snapped, flicking his paintbrush with disdain. "Commoner?" Max laughed, looking down at the bright colors splattered across her. "Have you seen this look? It's all the rage in the 21st century." The painter was taken aback, momentarily speechless. Max seized the moment, slipping into the stall and grabbing the spatula before anyone could stop her. As she turned to leave, a group of guardians of paradox cornered her, their faces serious and intent. "You're meddling with time," girl," one warned. "Oh, is that what I'm doing?" Max shot back, brandishing the spatula like a sword. "I thought I was just picking up some kitchenware." Just as the tension escalated, a commotion erupted behind her. The pompous painter had tripped over his own easel and sent paint flying everywhere, creating a beautiful chaos. Max took advantage of the distraction and bolted. "I need a vacation from all this madness," she yelled as she sprinted toward the portal. After a chaotic leap through time, she landed in a dystopian future, where towering buildings cast long shadows over the desolate streets. Here, technology reigned supreme, but people seemed more robotic than ever. "Just my luck," she muttered. "This should be a blast." She scanned the area, looking for the smartphone that contained critical data for stabilizing the timelines. "Where would I hide if I were a smartphone?" she wondered aloud. Her thoughts were interrupted by a group of rebels who emerged from the shadows. "You don't belong here," they shouted, aiming makeshift weapons at her. "Really? I thought I'd drop by for a cup of dystopia," Max quipped, hands raised in mock surrender. "But I'm actually looking for a smartphone." "An undercover agent," one rebel declared. "Get her." Max didn't have time to explain. She dashed down an alley, with the rebels hot on her heels. Just as they were closing in, she spotted a glint of metal, a smartphone perched precariously on a ledge. "Gotcha," she shouted, diving for it as the rebels stumbled over each other, their shouts echoing in her ears. She grabbed the phone and turned, triumphant, but her victory was short-lived. The rebels were right behind her, closing the gap. Using the smartphone's GPS, she activated a hidden time warp feature, opening a swirling portal right in front of her. "Sorry, fellas. Time's up," she yelled, jumping through just as they reached her. Emerging back in the coffee shop, she landed gracefully, artifacts in hand, to find chaos had erupted. The temporal authority and anachronists were still at each other's throats, but now there were guardians of paradox in the mix, looking equally confused. Max took a deep breath, glancing at the artifacts. "All right, everyone. Time to settle down and have a chat," she declared, waving the sock, spatula, and smartphone in the air like a parade leader. They turned to her, a mix of incredulity and annoyance on their faces. "What do you want?" one of the temporal authority members snapped. "I want peace," Max replied, heart racing but voice steady. "We're all time travelers here. We can work together. Or you can get caught in the time loop of your own making," shouted an anachronist. "Really? Who wrote that line? A fortune cookie?" Max shot back, feeling the tide shift in her favor. The factions paused, glancing at each other. Max seized the moment, her excitement bubbling over. "Look! We're all fighting over time, but we all live in it. Let's come up with a solution that allows us to coexist." "Like a coffee date," an anachronist quipped, earning a laugh from the crowd. "Yes. Exactly," Max exclaimed, energized. "How about a time-sharing agreement? Everyone gets a little piece of history to manage without messing it all up." The bickering factions looked at one another, considering her proposal. Slowly, a sense of camaraderie began to form, laughter replacing the tension. And just like that, the coffee shop turned into an unexpected hub of negotiations, complete with Max as the unlikely peacekeeper. "Now, can we finally have that coffee?" she asked, grinning widely. As they all settled in for a discussion over lattes and time travel tales, Max realized that sometimes, the best way to control time was simply to embrace the chaos and share a laugh. In the end, she may not have been the perfect time warrior, but she was definitely the most entertaining one. The coffee shop buzzed with lively conversation. Max leaned back in her chair, watching the once hostile factions engage in a spirited debate over their respective eras. The temporal authority representatives, now somewhat softened by the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, argued for the importance of maintaining a strict timeline, while the anachronists passionately advocated for creativity and chaos. Meanwhile, the guardians of paradox weighed in, suggesting that balance was key. Max couldn't help but smile. This was what she'd hoped for, a melting pot of ideas, where time travel didn't just mean hopping from one moment to the next, but learning from each other's experiences. She took a sip of her latte, the warm, rich flavor grounding her in the reality of the moment. "All right, let's hear some proposals," she said, raising her voice above the chatter. "What do you all think would make for a better timeline?" A young anachronist, sporting a pair of oversized glasses, jumped up. "How about a festival for time travelers? Each faction could showcase its era, and we could all learn from one another." Max nodded enthusiastically. "That's a great start. A time festival. We could have exhibitions, storytelling sessions, and even cooking demonstrations from different periods." A representative from the temporal authority frowned, crossing his arms. "What's to stop chaos from taking over? We can't have people running amok through time." Max leaned forward, trying to quell his concerns. "The festival could have structure. Think of it as a controlled celebration of history. We can set guidelines, strict ones, if you like, while still allowing for some fun." A murmuring of agreement spread through the group, and Max felt her confidence growing. "Plus, we can set up a timeline stabilization team to ensure everything stays intact during the event. That way, if anyone tries to mess with time, we can catch them right away." Elliot, who had been silently observing, finally spoke up. "This could work, Max. We've always been divided by our interpretations of time, but perhaps it's time to unify our efforts for the greater good." Encouraged, Max continued. "And we can invite citizens from all eras. Imagine the camaraderie we could foster. You could learn to dance the Charleston, while they could teach you how to moonwalk." The crowd laughed, the atmosphere shifting as ideas flowed more freely. Soon, individuals were breaking off into small groups, each brainstorming ways to make the festival a success. Max wandered among them, feeling a rush of satisfaction as she witnessed the once feuding factions collaborating. "Max," Elliot called, beckoning her over. "I think we need to talk logistics. We'll need volunteers, materials, and coffee." Max interrupted, grinning. "You can never have too much coffee at a time festival." Elliot chuckled, shaking his head. "Right. But we'll also need a safe space for the artifacts. We can't have them getting lost or worse, stolen." "Good point," she replied, her mind racing. "We could set up a secure area with guards from each faction. That way, everyone's invested in protecting the timeline." "Brilliant," Elliot said, his eyes sparkling with pride. "And we can host workshops. Each faction could teach participants about its time period's customs and technologies." The two of them dove into planning, jotting down ideas on napkins and scraps of paper. Max's enthusiasm was infectious, and soon they had a full outline of events, including timelines for setting everything up. As the discussions continued, she felt a sense of purpose wash over her. This wasn't just about restoring timelines or battling over who had the right to history. It was about creating a shared experience that highlighted the best of each era while fostering a sense of community. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting warm hues through the coffee shop windows, the group had transformed into a unified team, each person motivated by the prospect of the upcoming festival. Max leaned back in her chair, surveying the scene with a sense of accomplishment. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the room. The door swung open, and a wild-eyed man stumbled in, his clothes tattered and covered in dirt. "Help!" he gasped, collapsing against the counter. "They're coming!" Max jumped up, adrenaline surging. "Who's coming?" "The Time Snatchers," he exclaimed, gasping for breath. "They're a rogue faction that wants to control all timelines for themselves. I barely escaped." A hush fell over the coffee shop, the earlier camaraderie evaporating as tension seeped back into the air. The members of the Temporal Authority exchanged worried glances, while the anachronists looked ready to spring into action. "What do we do?" one of the Guardians asked, nervously fiddling with his timepiece. Max stepped forward, her heart pounding. "We need to unite now more than ever. If they want to disrupt the timelines, we can't let them succeed." The man's eyes widened. "You don't understand. They're ruthless. They'll stop at nothing to get what they want." "Then we'll be ready for them," Max declared, her voice steady. "Let's put our plans into action and protect our timelines together. We can't let fear divide us." The room buzzed with renewed determination as the factions began strategizing. Max led the charge, rallying everyone into action. They gathered supplies, devised a plan to fortify the coffee shop, and set up surveillance to keep an eye out for any sign of the Time Snatchers. As night fell, the once cozy cafe transformed into a command center. The baristas brewed pot after pot of coffee, while the factions organized their defenses. Max could see the glimmers of hope in everyone's eyes, knowing they were standing together for a cause greater than their individual agendas. Just as they finalized their plans, the sound of distant shouting echoed through the streets. "They're here," someone cried out, pointing toward the window. Max's heart raced as she moved to the front, peering out into the darkness. Shadows loomed, figures moving swiftly in the night. They were close, very close. "Prepare yourselves," she shouted, adrenaline surging through her veins. "We fight for our timelines. We fight for our future." As the door burst open and the Time Snatchers flooded in, Max felt a sense of clarity wash over her. This was it. She was no longer just a clumsy time warrior trying to find her place. She was a leader, ready to protect everything she had worked for. The clash began. Max dodged and weaved through the chaos, her heart racing as she saw her newfound allies spring into action. An anachronist swung a makeshift weapon, while a member of the Temporal Authority created a protective barrier with their advanced tech. Max grabbed a coffee pot and used it like a shield, hurling it at an incoming assailant. "Fight smart," she shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. "We're not just warriors, we're a team." Elliot was by her side, directing their defenses and using his time manipulation abilities to freeze incoming attacks momentarily. The Guardians held their ground, keeping the Time Snatchers at bay while the anachronists peppered the attackers with clever tricks and distractions. Max could see that they were gaining ground, the unity of their efforts turning the tide. The Time Snatchers, expecting easy prey, began to falter as they realized they were up against a united front. "Push them back," Max urged, feeling the rush of adrenaline as she charged forward with a group of rebels. "We can't let them take what we've built." The fight was fierce, but Max felt alive in a way she never had before. Each strike and counter was not just about survival, it was about protecting the very essence of time itself. Just when it seemed they might overwhelm the intruders, the leader of the Time Snatchers emerged, a tall figure with a menacing glare, brandishing a time device that shimmered ominously. "Fools! You think you can defy the course of history? I'll take what I want. Max's breath hitched. This was the moment she had prepared for. Not if we can help it, she shouted, rallying her allies once more. We're not going to let you ruin everything. With a final surge of energy, she propelled herself forward, channeling her skills as a time warrior. Elliot. Now. At her command, Elliot unleashed a wave of energy, manipulating the flow of time to slow the Snatcher's movements. In that split second, Max lunged for the device, her heart racing as she reached for it. The leader stumbled, caught off guard by the sudden shift in momentum. Together. Max yelled, feeling the power of unity surge through her as her allies converged around her, pushing the Snatcher back with their combined strength. With one swift motion, Max grabbed the device, wresting it from the leader's grasp. It felt electric in her hands, a tangible representation of their victory over division and chaos. Now, let's end this, she declared, channeling the energy into a protective barrier that enveloped the coffee shop. The time snatchers reeled back, caught in the shimmering glow. As the light expanded, Max felt the weight of history shifting around her. The timelines began to stabilize, and the chaotic energy dissipated, leaving only a sense of calm. The remaining time snatchers, realizing they were defeated, retreated, their leader cursing under his breath as they fled into the night. Cheers erupted in the coffee shop, and Max couldn't help but laugh, exhilarated by the triumph. We did it, she shouted, feeling the warmth of camaraderie wash over her. Elliot grinned, pulling her into a quick embrace. You led us well, Max. You truly are a time warrior. As the crowd celebrated, Max's thoughts drifted to the upcoming time festival. They had turned a chaotic situation into something powerful and unifying. We can use this energy to propel our plans forward, she exclaimed. Over the next few hours, they regrouped, sharing stories and laughter, forging deeper connections as they planned the festival. It felt like a new dawn for their once fractured factions, a chance to redefine their relationship with time. Together. As dawn broke over the horizon, the coffee shop filled with the scent of fresh coffee, the group prepared for what lay ahead. They would face challenges, but together, they could create a world where time wasn't just a commodity to be controlled, but a rich tapestry of experiences to share. Max stood at the window, watching the sun rise, its golden rays promising a new beginning. She knew this was just the start of their journey, one filled with endless possibilities and the kind of adventures that made life truly worth living. All right, everyone, she called, turning back to the group, her heart full of excitement. Let's make this festival unforgettable. And as they set to work, Max felt a deep sense of belonging wash over her. In the swirling chaos of time, she had found her place, not just as a warrior, but as a bridge between worlds, ready to embrace whatever came next. With laughter, collaboration, and a spirit of adventure, they were prepared to create something extraordinary, and that, she realized, was the most powerful time travel of all.